Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome on behalf of the Edinburgh Chamber of Commerce to this afternoon's session. For those who don't know, I am Jo Davidson. I'm Head of Policy at the Edinburgh Chamber, and it's my great pleasure to welcome and host today's session, and particularly to welcome our guest speaker, Philip King, the Interim Small Business Commissioner. Philip's going to speak to us today about the work of the Small Business Commissioner and how he and his team can help, not just at the moment while we obviously face the current crisis, but also longer term in terms of the support that is available there, which I have to confess, until we were brought together by British Chamber of Commerce, I didn't know too much about myself. So I'm hoping and I'm sure that today will be a very insightful and interesting session, and certainly will help all the delegates that we've got today in terms of that ongoing that could be available moving forward. So Philip has had a career spanning over 40 years. He's held senior credit management roles in the high-tech and communications sector and distribution and retail, including spells at Olivetti and Vodafone. He was appointed Director General of the Institute of Credit Management in 2005 and later became its Chief Executive, overseeing that organisation's move to chartered status. As Chief Executive of that organisation, he worked tirelessly with government agencies to support small businesses and change attitudes towards late payment, and I think we're going to hear a bit about that and what he has to say today. He was a founding board member of the Startup Loans Company, a red tape champion for insolvency, and the first lay chair of the Joint Insolvency Committee. He's also the author of the Managing Cash Flow Guides that have been published by the Chartered Institute of Credit Management for Government, and was the architect of the Prompt Payment Code, which that organisation administered on behalf of BEIS until its transfer to the Office of the Small Business Commissioner in March 2020. Philip was appointed to the post of Interim Small Business Commissioner in January 2020, so interesting timing, Philip, from your perspective. And as Small Business Commissioner, he's continuing to live his passion in directly supporting government and delivering for small businesses and helping them to prosper and grow. So without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to Philip, and then we'll pick up Q&A and comments and discussion at the end.
Thanks, Joanne, and good afternoon to everybody. And thanks for doing those introductions. It's always good to know who's listening in. And I have to say that I think I'm on my 29th webinar since the lockdown started, and I much prefer small groups like this to big groups, because we can interact. And please do come back when we finish, and when I finish droning on, and come back to me and ask questions, because if we can help you, then we want to be able to do that. Joanne's not alone in knowing little about the Small Business Commissioner. To be frank, too many people don't know about us at all, and those that do know about us often have no idea what we do or why we do it. So I want to start this afternoon, if I can, by at least telling you who we are, what we do, and then I want to talk through what we do for small business and how we achieve that, and then I want to share a few tips from my perspective on cash flow management and making sure that businesses do indeed get paid for the services or products they've delivered. The Small Business Commissioner was established in 2017 from the Enterprise Act of the previous year, and its legislative powers or objectives are to resolve payment disputes between big and small businesses and to tackle unfavourable payment practices. My powers are enshrined in law and are pretty prescriptive. So there are a number of things I can do and even more things that I can't do. So let me start by sharing those. I can only deal with complaints from businesses with less than 50 employees. And I can only deal with complaints about businesses with more than 50 employees. So I can only get formally involved in a dispute between a small business and a large business as defined in that way. I cannot deal with any dispute that's covered by alternative legislation or an ombudsman or an arbitrator or anything else. So Construction is subject to the Construction Act, and therefore I'm not allowed to get involved in those things. And I can't get involved in contractual disputes or pricing disputes or delivery disputes. I can only get involved in late payment issues. But let me say that although those are my formal powers, I have a team of caseworkers, and I'll explain what they do in a few minutes. But what I can do, and I do frequently, is get engaged informally in areas which don't strictly sit within my legal remit, but where I can play a part in helping businesses to resolve issues and particularly helping them to get paid. So I think the role of the Small Business Commissioner has three streams to it. The first is offering advice and information to small business. So I have a team of caseworkers, we have a website, and we spend time providing advice to businesses on what they need to do to get paid. We have a website with a load of tips and advice, an interest calculator to help them work out whether or not they're owed late payment interest and how much, and tips and advice on how to collect cash from customers that are choosing not to pay or are delaying payment to them. So we give advice and we give information, and where we can't help, then we signpost to other organisations that can. So we signpost to organisations that can support and offer mediation services and so on. The second area is that we get involved in directly helping businesses who are struggling to get paid. Sometimes that means that we pick up the phone and talk to the customer and the supplier and act in a sort of informal mediation role. On other occasions, we will pick up the phone, talk to a customer and get payment from them. And so far we've collected about £7 million doing that for small businesses. We do it because we are sometimes more effective than an individual business can be. So an email from the Small Business Commissioner or a call from the Small Business Commissioner can have more power than a call from an individual small micro business. So we are effective in getting people to talk to us and to release money to their suppliers. And interestingly, quite often, we don't even have a conversation. We will leave a message for somebody to call us back. They don't call us back, but suddenly, miraculously, money appears in the account of the person that we've been ringing on behalf of. So we have an indirect effect. And indeed, this morning, we collected £3,000 for a business that had simply rung up a customer and said they were about to ring us and could they pay, and they paid within an hour. So we have a sometimes direct effect, sometimes an indirect effect. And the final part of that particular stream is that we can investigate poor payment practice. So where we find evidence that a large business is behaving badly towards its small suppliers, we can investigate that, we can make a determination and issue a formal report, and we can make recommendations on that business to improve the way it treats its suppliers. And we have published a number of reports on our website, and we talk to the businesses concerned, we understand what they do and how they do it, and we make recommendations on how they can improve, and then we follow that up later on to make sure that they've implemented the agreement that we made and that their suppliers are being treated better than they were before. The final stream, the third stream, is changing payment culture. So government created the Small Business Commissioner to attempt to change the culture of late payment. So we get heavily involved in promoting good practice, encouraging businesses to behave well and working with them to improve the way in which they pay their suppliers. Our ultimate goal is not to be needed and to make ourselves completely unnecessary, but I think we're some way away from that objective just yet. It's clear that in the current climate, cash flow is more important than ever. Several people said that in their introductions earlier. And one of the best forms of cash flow is often money that's already owed to you. So on top of all the government schemes and so on, it's always worth looking to see who owes you money and hasn't paid it. And we've been involved heavily in that over recent weeks. We collected £91,000 for a person, a business in Northern Ireland who was on a webinar I was speaking on a couple of weeks ago. And that business had 25 employees, a number of contractors, and would have gone bust within a week if we hadn't generated that payment. And that makes me incredibly proud of my team and the work they do. Similarly, we collected £364 for a business a couple of weeks ago, which sounds incredibly trivial, but in fact, for that particular individual was really important and enabled her to feed the family that weekend, which she may not have otherwise been able to do. So we get involved in both ends of the scale, and it's important that we recognise the power that cash flow has on small businesses. In terms of changing culture, we are seeing a trend of late of some businesses who are doing really good stuff with their supply chain. I was on a webinar this morning with Deloitte, and they had 4 of their clients speaking about what they were doing. And some of those are doing some really impressive things to make sure their supply chain is sustainable. Morrison's announced early on in the COVID crisis that they would pay all their smallest suppliers immediately rather than wait for the payment terms to come due. And they would recategorize businesses so that anyone spending £1 million with them or less a year would be categorized as a small business, where previously it had been £100,000. Taylor Wimpey announced a couple of weeks ago that they were paying all their smallest suppliers as soon as they could. And they introduced a pay it forward scheme, which enabled them to pay their smallest subcontractors, self-employed subcontractors, early for work they hadn't yet done. And they paid about 2,500 of their smallest contractors 3 months' money up front in preparation for work they're going to do when the sites return to normal. And I was on a webinar with Pete Redfern, the chief exec of Taylor Wimpey, earlier this week, and he was describing some of the things that they've done for their supply chain, which I think have been really impressive. Conversely, we've seen businesses doing completely the wrong thing, in my view. And we've seen businesses writing out to their entire supply chains saying, sorry, COVID-19 is a bit of a problem for us. We're not going to pay you anything until it's over. And somewhat ironically, they often start that email with the words, dear valued supplier, which always strikes me as slightly ironic and unnecessary. I've been writing to the chief execs of the businesses doing the right thing and thanking them on behalf of small business for what they're doing. I've been writing to the chief execs of businesses that are doing the wrong thing, and I've been asking to have conversations with them to understand their position and to share with them the issue that they are creating for their smallest suppliers. I've got one such call immediately after this webinar this afternoon, and I've had several in recent days. And where those businesses haven't responded to me at all, I persuaded the Small Business Minister, Paul Scully, to write to them last Friday and nudged them to respond to us. And we're now setting up calls with him, me, and the chief executive of the business concerned to talk through their issues. It would be naive to suggest that every business can pay all their suppliers in the current climate. There's a perception sometimes that if a business is big, it must have loads of money and therefore shouldn't have a problem paying its suppliers. I'm afraid the reality is that often the only difference between a big business and a small business is the number of zeros on the end of the number. And in some cases, some very big businesses have got some very real problems and are struggling to pay their supply chain. When that happens, what I'm saying to those businesses is think about what you're doing and don't just send out a blanket email to all your suppliers saying you're not going to be paid, but think about the impact you're having. And what I'm asking them to do is to move from the transactional mindset to the emotional one. For a large business, not paying their supply chain may mean they don't tick a few rows on a spreadsheet. For a small business like the one I was mentioning where we collected a few £100, a couple of weeks ago, this is very real. And small businesses and small business owners really suffer when they don't get paid. And this isn't about just money in their bank account. This is around mental health. It's around well-being. It's around, in some cases, sleep deprivation, mood swings, relationship problems, all of which can arise from the fact that they're sitting there waiting for a payment to arrive, and it hasn't. I was talking to the chief exec of one of the chambers of commerce in the Midlands.
Sorry, Philip, you've frozen on us. Can you hear us? Oh, he's gone. Oh, no, there he is. Sorry, Philip, you froze a bit there.
I did.
Yeah, we got to, you were speaking to the chief executive of one of the chambers of commerce in the Midlands, and then you froze, sorry.
Thank you. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me? Thank you very much. Good. The age of technology, eh? Yes, so I was talking to this lady. She was owed £23,000. It didn't arrive. Over Christmas, she had £3 in her business account. And for her, Christmas was absolutely ruined because she was worried that if it didn't come in immediately after Christmas, she wouldn't be able to pay the staff's wages in the first week after Christmas. It did come in. It came in on the 5th of January. And when she challenged the customer about why they hadn't paid, the answer was very simple. The person that was supposed to be making the payment had gone on holiday for Christmas a couple of days early and never got round to making the payment, and they thought they'd do it when they came back. And for me, that's a really stark reminder of the difference between a big business that just hasn't got round to making the payment and a small business that sees their account empty over a period when they thought it was going to be in surplus. And I was on a webinar with another chamber last week, also in the Midlands, where the chair of that chamber was sharing his personal experience of late payment over the last couple of years and what it's done to him and how it's affected his life and relationships and so on. So it's really important that we get businesses to think in those terms and understand exactly what impact they can have. And what I'm saying to the chief execs is, if you can't pay, then look at your business and work out which are the most vulnerable, smallest suppliers and see whether you can pay them. And if you can't, can you pay them something to at least get some money into their account for the short term? And at least have conversations. And they come back to me and they say, well, in the email, we said, if you've got a problem with this, email us and we'll talk to you. The reality is that small businesses don't feel able to respond to that in that way. And so they don't. And they just sit there and worry. And I think it's really important that big businesses recognize that power shift and the way in which businesses behave and interact. And Umbretta talks about culture and the way in which she helps businesses to lead and so on. And I'm sure she's familiar with the style of leadership that can make a real difference in the way a business behaves. So it's very important that we do that. It's important that we get that across. And what I'm trying to get businesses to do is to be collaborative rather than confrontational and to work with their supply chain. Right now, businesses all need to work together. We're seeing examples, in our streets of people doing favors for other people, getting food for people, and so on. I mean, and it's really important that in a business sense, we carry on that same community spirit and work together to get through what is a pandemic that is affecting us all. And we shouldn't forget that for small businesses, if this doesn't work through and they don't get cash flow, they will not survive. There was a report in the paper this morning from the FSB that talks about the probability that 1 in 3 of the businesses that have shut down may not reopen after the crisis. And if that happens, then clearly the economy takes a huge hit, and that's really bad news for the country and for the economy. But also for those large businesses that rely on their supply chains, they will suddenly find their suppliers aren't there. And many large businesses rely on small businesses who can be fleet of foot, dynamic, flexible, fast to market, and bring things that their bigger suppliers can't. So they need to recognize the importance of that and the value of it. And, you know, I think we're going to get to the end of this crisis, and businesses are going to look at the behavior of larger businesses over this period, and they're going to remember how they were treated, and they're going to remember how they behaved. And it's in businesses' interests to make sure they come out and can hold their heads high and be proud of what they've done over the last few months. For me, these are all things that are important in terms of making sure that we survive this crisis. More generally, I think it's important that we recognise that small businesses need to make sure they get paid as a matter of course. And I like to think that there are three asks that businesses need to keep in mind when they're trading. We should start by remembering that credit only exists because people want to make sales. Whoever had the idea, I don't know when, but a long time ago, that it would be a good idea to supply somebody with something and then just wait around for 4 weeks while they paid for it, didn't make a lot of sense. The only reason you would do that would be to generate sales and encourage people to buy from you and help the process and the cash cycle work its way through. So credit is a sales aid, and it's something we should use meaningfully and well. And the three asks that I always allude to are, first of all, ask who you're dealing with. It's easy to get an order and think Christmas has arrived and supply it. But if you get an order from WH Smith, for example, the last time I looked, there were 17 different WH Smith trading companies on Companies House. If you invoice the wrong one, they won't be able to pay you. They can't process the invoice through their books. They can't put it through for tax reasons, and you won't get paid. So if it's WH Smith Trading or WH Smith Wholesale or WH Smith, whatever it might be, make sure that you're invoicing the right business. And if you're supplying with another small business, then are they a sole trader? Are they a limited company? I talked to a debt collection lawyer that I know some months ago, and he said that 38% of the cases that he received were in the wrong company name. 38% in the wrong name. He couldn't do anything. He couldn't start any legal action. He couldn't do anything at all until they were in the right name. And you know what? When you've invoiced in the wrong name, you haven't been paid, and you go back to someone who's not paying you and ask them for the correct details, they're often not very willing to share those details because they don't want to pay you at all. So if you get the information up front when they do want your services, that's the right time to do it. The second ask is, when and how am I going to be paid? If someone wants me to supply something, they're going to tell me when they want it. The natural response to that is, when am I going to be paid for it? And if you don't agree that up front, then it can be no surprise when afterwards you've invoiced and they're not paying you, they suddenly decide to tell you that their terms are 90 days or 60 days or never. So it's really important that terms are agreed up front. Ideally, they need to be on a contract. You need to have a formal contract that sets out the terms and conditions and so on. But even if you have an email exchange that says, we'll pay you in 30 days, there's something you can follow up on. So get something in writing that just agrees when you're going to be paid. And alongside that ask is the one around how you're going to be paid. If a large business is placing an order with you, they will have a process to clear invoices. Find out what it is before you have to raise the invoice. If they want invoices on pink paper in blue ink sent to Edinburgh, then give them invoices on pink paper in blue ink sent to Edinburgh. If that's what their system needs, then meet those requirements. I'm being slightly far-fetched, but it's really important that we meet the need that they have. If they need a particular length order number with a particular 2-character digit in front of it, make sure you've got that order number before you invoice. Otherwise, it will go into a black hole and never go anywhere. And many businesses have very sophisticated systems for handling invoices. And I've lost count of how many small businesses have said to me they don't trust the large business's system to process their invoice. So they bucket and they send it to someone they know because their mate will make sure their invoice gets through. Guess what? Their mate might not be there when the invoice arrives. They might not be in the right place to process the invoice. They might be too busy to talk to somebody and get it to the right place. And eventually it will get into the same system that it should have got to in the first place anyway, before it can be paid. So many businesses have got systems that facilitate payment. And for many big businesses, the last thing they want to do is to touch an invoice manually. They simply want to get it through the system and out the other side. So complying with what they need is really important. And the third ask is asking for your money. If you've supplied something in good faith and it works, or the service is what was asked for, and you are due to be paid for it, and it's a sizable sum of money, ring up in advance on a customer service style call and make sure that everything's okay with the invoice, they've got it, and they're processing it. But at the very least, on the day the invoice is due, if you haven't been paid, pick up the phone and talk to somebody and chase them for payment. Get in their face and don't let them forget you. It's really important that you do that. Businesses just all too often sit around and hope the money is going to come in because they're sure it will, because they trust the buyer and they're absolutely confident they will pay. But you know what? It often isn't one of their priorities, and you need to make sure that it is one of their priorities. And that might mean talking to somebody who isn't in accounts payable. If you've got a contact who placed the order with you and was dealing with you when the contract was set up, talk to them, get them to bat for you internally and get the money that you're owed. If you can't get hold of somebody at the moment because they're shut on furlough or their business is shut down, then look at LinkedIn, look at Twitter, see if you can find contacts of people that can bat for you and help you. It's really vital that you use every means you can to get paid. If you're not being paid, someone else probably is, and you want to be at the top of the tree, not somewhere down the bottom trying to climb up it. So it's really important. The Small Business Commissioner can help get payment individually for businesses and give practical advice as well. Our service is free. We don't charge for our service, so we're available smallbusinesscommissioner.gov.uk, and there's an online form there to use. You can get hold of us easily enough. We're there for a reason. Government put us in place in order to help small businesses. We are there to bat for you when we need to. We're a voice for you when you need a voice, and we're a source of information and advice. Please use us and let us help you if you have problems. I think here ended the Philip King lesson, Joe. So happy to have a chat now and take questions or discussion with anybody.
Philip, thank you so much for that. There's a lot to take in there. Some very sobering stuff as well, which I'm sure a lot of people on the call and a lot of people on the call's clients will recognise in terms of just sometimes how tough it is as a small business owner, and what seem like relatively small amounts of money really are life and death to these organisations. So it's some pretty sobering stuff there, and well done to you and the team in terms of some of the strides that you've been making there, and some of the individual stories that you're able to tell about how you've helped and supported those people. Well, can I just thank Philip absolutely for the time that you've given us today. I know that it's exceptionally busy for you at the moment, Philip, as it is for many of us, but we really, really appreciate it. It was a hugely insightful session, and we've taken a lot from it. As I've said, we've taken something as a chamber in terms of how we can support this effort. You know, I love the people piece that you articulated, and as Umbreta's as amplified. You know, I like the bit as well about how people will remember how businesses have behaved in this, and I think that's a trend we're seeing generally also. And we have, again, as a chamber, have a role to play in making sure people don't forget that message, and that collaboration piece, and actually building those relationships and speaking to one another and having person-to-person conversations as much as we can in the current climate. The importance of that, I think, has really struck me today. So again, can I please thank you very, very much for your time, and can I thank all of you for attending and for your contributions to the conversation, and hopefully we'll see you again at another Chamber webinar very, very soon. Take care, everyone, stay safe, and thank you again.
Thank you very much indeed. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.